Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's event. I'm Laura Dillon from MS Dynamics World, and we're here today for a session all about how to automate your Workday in Dynamics GP, including forwarding, data migrations, third-party integrations, and more. Our presenter today is a regular presenter here with us at MSDW, Matt Greyerbiehl with SalesPad, and it's great to have him here with us again today. So as we get started, please know that we do welcome your questions. You can enter them in at any time during the presentation in the Q&A box on the right side of the event window. I know that Matt will leave time at the end to answer as many of them as he can. So without any further delay, I'm going to hand things off to Matt to get us started.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Laura, and welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about how to automate your Workday in Dynamics GP. And we're specifically going to be talking about an application, a tool that we have called Automation Agent. And what Automation Agent does is allows you to automate certain workflow functions such as document forwarding, batch movements, reoccurring sales, or document forwards on a routine schedule that once applied requires very little manual manipulation to forward and complete all of those workflow tasks. In addition to all that workflow automation that you can achieve through Automation Agent, it also allows you to do additional things like data integrations. And what I mean by that is if you have a third-party application, such as an e-commerce website or maybe a manufacturing software, or something that you're running outside of the SalesPad GP environment that you may want integrated back and forth to SalesPad and GP, you can set up automations to run a schedule to pull in and push out data back and forth between those applications. And so as we get into the demo portion, we're going to look at 3 use case scenarios leveraging Automation Agent to do some of that automation. So the first one is going to be a scenario where we have a sales document with a back-ordered line and a SOP to POP link. It's going to that document is going to sit in the back order queue until that PO is received, and once received, Automation Agent will recognize that allocation has occurred and progress it to the next step. So that'll be one use case. We'll also look at a use case where an order has progressed through the workflow to the point where it's in the batch or the queue that we've designated that we want to transfer to invoice from, and we'll see it automatically transfer to an invoice. And then the third use case will be that third-party application scenario where we talk about pulling in information from or sales data from a third-party application such as an e-commerce platform, how we handle that, what that looks like. And so we'll kind of go through that as our third use case in the demo. But before we get to the demo, just a couple things to introduce you to SalesPad. So I'll talk about the history of our product suite, and then we'll kind of get into a little bit more detail on Automation Agent, what it does, what you can automate, and then we'll get into the demo that will cover the use cases I just described. So just a little bit of history on SalesPad. So we incorporated in 2003. We were born out of a true distribution environment. So one of our owners ran and continues to run to this day a distribution company that distributes edge banding for office furniture. He deployed Dynamics GP in that environment and found that it was missing some things to manage workflow and sales document visibility in terms of what stage those documents are at in the fulfillment process. And so he reached out to a friend who happens to be one of our other owners who was a developer by trade, and together they built out what is now SalesPad. So fast forward 15 years later, the company has evolved quite a bit. We now have 100 plus employees. We have about 15,000 users and 1,200 companies that have adopted SalesPad. We are located in Grand Rapids, Michigan. All of our support, everything is all under one roof. And we do have active involvement in the community here with different outreach programs. As far as the product suite goes, again, today we're going to be focusing on Automation Agent specifically, but just to kind of show SalesPad at a high-level snapshot, we not only have the desktop application, which is, your order entry, customer management, CRM type functionality. We also have a host of additional applications now that have evolved over the last 15 years, such as data collection, our warehouse management tool. We have a couple shipping products. We have some mobile sales tools. We have payment processing, EDI, manufacturing integrations, and a whole host of other things. So it's the product suite has really kind of matured and developed over that last 15 years. So with that, let's jump into Automation Agent more specifically. So Automation Agent is a new module for SalesPad Desktop. And like I said, it's going to allow you to automate certain workflow functions so you can really take the manual human intervention out of progressing documents through workflows. With that, it has an advanced scheduling function that you can set these forward or these tasks or whatever you have deployed on your workflow to run on an automated schedule. And we get very specific with the way in which you can set up and deploy those schedules. Now, although it is automated, you do have an option to manually process these, and I'll kind of show both. And then the next thing I want to point out is each one of these integrations has its own instance of settings. And we'll see what that means in the demo environment. But per automation, per integration we're running, we'll have our own settings menu that's built out that allows you to define certain things like, for example, on an e-commerce integration, what batch do you want to have the integration look at that is designated as the export batch? So in other words, what batch are the orders completely fulfilled with the shipping and tracking numbers written back to them such that they are in a state that we want them to be pushed back to the e-commerce platform. So there's those instant settings for each application, for each integration that allows you to kind of define all of that criteria. We also have error handling built in. So if you are running an automation on a workflow, or if you're running an automation to integrate to e-commerce platform, whatever the case may be, if there is a record that wasn't successfully moved from a batch to another batch or imported from the website properly, we will identify that and put that into a view that allows you to kind of drill in and see exactly what happened so you can make the necessary corrections. Another important thing with our error handling is we will not hold up the entire import or the entire batch move for one error that has occurred. It's just going to simply skip that record, do the rest of the records, and then allow you to kind of go back and make that correction as needed. And then finally, I have on here history. So as these integrations or automations are running, we keep a running log of each time that runs, whether it was run successfully, how many errors, how many imports were done correctly. So you'll have that historic view as the automations are running. So now talking about what you can automate. So the first thing, kind of the core functionality that comes with Automation Agent is workflow actions. So if you have the need to forward a document from one queue to another and you want to automate that, we can do that. If you want to do an automatic transfer from order to invoice at some point in the workflow, we can do things like that. We can also do reoccurring sales and a number of other workflow-related functions that can be automated through Automation Agent. Another thing that we can do is scripting. So if you want a script to run on a routine, we can do that. Integrations there, that's referencing that integration to a third-party application. So in my case today, I'm going to show an integration to an e-commerce platform, but this could be really any other application that you want to integrate to. I also have on here data manipulation. So if you're not leveraging like an API call to do this integration back and forth, you want to write something directly to the SQL backend of an application, we can do that. If you want a certain user-defined field value to update fields in another application, that's something that we can do through the data manipulation feature. And then we also have the ability to do data migrations, and this could be a one-time scenario or it could be on a perpetual basis. So a one-time scenario might be you have an application that you're sunsetting and you want to move that data into the SalesPad GP environment, then maybe we do a one-time migration of that. Another example of perpetual might be you're going to continue to run that application, but we want data to kind of pass back and forth. We can do that on a perpetual basis as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into the demo here, and I'm going to bring up my SalesPad desktop environment. And so the use cases that I'm going to start with will be the sales line automatically, or the sales document automatically forwarding from my back order queue to a ready-to-pick queue once the linked purchase order is received. So that'll be kind of the first scenario. And then I'll show the automatic transfer from order to invoice, and then we'll close out with a look at an e-commerce integration and what that might look like. Now, before I get into the automation, I want to kind of lay a little bit of groundwork for the way workflow works inside of SalesPad in case any of you aren't familiar with that. So I'm going to go into my application here and go into a tool we call Sales Monitor. And what you're looking at here is a particular doc ID from GP. And I have essentially set the different stages that are possible for this order. This kind of mimics my fulfillment process, my pick, pack, ship, my how I handle exceptions, that sort of thing. So I've got all of these different queues labeled, and these are the same as batches in GP. We leverage the batch function to kind of give you this workflow view. You can name these whatever you want to name them. You can number them however you want them numbered. But the idea is inside of SalesPad, we give you that batch list view so you can see where all of your orders are at in each one of those stages, and then we show you how many orders are in each one of those stages and the dollar value that represents. So for example, right now in my pick queue, I know I've got 22 orders that total just over $3,600. And then over here on the right, we have kind of a detailed view broken down by batch. So that's my new order queue. These are in review. These are associated with some kind of production activity. These are pick, pack, so on and so forth. So this is the front-end user interface view of our workflow. It gives you that bird's eye view as documents progress from one stage to the next. Now, within each one of these documents, to forward them, we actually have buttons that we set up and allow you to define those buttons that move it from one stage to the next. So in this case, I have my button labeled release, and so when I hit release, it's going to move it from my new order queue to the next workflow queue. And so I think it's important to understand this concept to start, just because when we talk about automation with Automation Agent, we're effectively clicking that for you. So you're not opening that record and clicking that to push it into the next stage. Now, when you're routing these orders, when you're deciding what queue they fall into, we also have a whole workflow rule engine on the back end that also has plugins that can perform certain business functions as those documents progress from one stage to the next. So this is the back end setup view of that same document ID. And so here you can see I've got my queues listed. I've got the button caption showing what that button is going to be labeled as. I have plugins that I can trigger at different stages as a document moves from that step to the next step. In this case, I have smart printing and split sales documents. So smart printing is going to automatically trigger a print job for me. Split sales documents going to evaluate different criteria like are some lines back ordered, are some lines not. If they are, split it so that I fulfill my back order lines before, I fulfill the items I have in stock and push the back order items into a back order queue. So those are kind of the plugins that you can run, and we have a whole library that you get with SalesPad. And so again, keep in mind when we go to Automation Agent, as we're automatically forwarding, if you want these plugins to automatically trigger as that document's forwarded via Automation Agent, we have a setting that says use workflow plugins, and so you could trigger these automatically through Automation Agent. So in addition to the plugins, though, we also have a rule section, and so your rules can be set up to effectively route the order. So as you release them, if you want to evaluate certain conditions on that sales document and then route it to a specific queue accordingly, we can do that. And so I'll kind of show an example of that. So if I have a back order rule here, I'm evaluating it in my Print Plus queue and saying, okay, if a back order item is identified, move it into the back order queue as it's exiting that batch. And so that's one rule. I have another one in here for example, North Warehouse. So if my warehouse ID on the sales document is North, then move it into the North picking queue. And so those are kind of some of the things that you can set up. But just like the plugins, we have a whole extensive library of condition IDs that you can deploy. And so this becomes very important if you're automating things. You can actually set up rules so that the automation not only progresses the document in the queue, from one queue to the other, but it also evaluates these rules and conditions. So you can effectively turn that schedule on, let Automation Agent run, and it's going to move these documents through your workflow based on the rule structure that you have in the back end. So now that we have a little bit of the groundwork laid with workflow and Sales Monitor to view the documents as they progress from the queues, the plugins and the rules that can be deployed in the background to trigger business functions like printing, splitting, as well as the rules to route them to appropriate queues, let's go ahead and take a look at Automation Agent now. So I've got my automation lookup here, and you can see I've got two automations that pulled into the grid. I've got a transfer to invoice, and I've got a back order automation set here. So when I open this up, this is the automation card. And so I've got my automation name. The platform is batch forward. So what this is going to do is look for opportunities to move a document from one batch to the next. And so I have the automation enabled, and then I also have the component, which is the batch forward, enabled and set in an automated mode here. So the distinction between the automation and the component will be more important to understand when we get to the e-commerce platform, because you can have a single automation that has multiple components, and so that's why we kind of have the automation distinction there between the actual full automation and the component of that automation with two separate settings there. An example of a multi-component would be, like I said, on the e-commerce platform when you have order import, order export, order cancel, inventory exports. So if you have multiple things that that automation is doing, those would be broken out as separate components that can have their own separate schedules and automation routines. So that's kind of the automation, the component-enabled automated mode. Now this is an example of the instance settings. So for this particular backorder automation, I have these specific settings that I can define. So in my case, I'm looking at my backorder batch for this particular document ID. When I'm thinking about whether or not I want this batch forward to use workflow plugins, in my case I do, so I have that set to true. So you've got all of these different things that you can define for this specific automation. And then we have our action center. So any exceptions, any errors that happen while this automation attempts to run and forward those documents are going to be captured and then on display here in the action center. So that's kind of the automation card in a nutshell. And let's go ahead and transition now and actually see what the use case looks like. So I'm going to go to my customer lookup here, and I'm going to generate an order manually and then release it to workflow. And we're going to have this item that I have on this document be back ordered such that it goes in the back order queue, and I'll generate a stop to pop link to actually buy it. So here's my sales document. I'm going to enter an item here, and I may actually have this in stock, so I'm just going to manually back order it. Yeah, I've got some in stock. So okay, so I'll manually back order that, save it. So this is going to be document number. We'll see that generate in just a second here. And once that document number is in, we'll go ahead and release this to workflow. So it's 10460 is the order number. And when I release this, because it is back ordered, it should route it based on that back order rule to my back order queue. So there it's in my back order queue. So if I go to Sales Monitor here and I refresh this, and I'm manually refreshing, but you can have this automatically refresh every 30 seconds, every minute, every 5 minutes, so that as documents are automating and moving through that workflow, you can kind of see it in almost real time, every 30 seconds there. So if you look here, I've got one order in my back order queue, and it's that 10460 that I just generated because that line I flagged as back order there. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and you'll notice that we do have a purchase tab here. And so if I select purchase, that's going to create a purchase generation for this, basically a stop to pop link. So I'll create that PO, and everything looks good there. I'll go ahead and save that, and I'll see a PO number generated for it. Now, I did this manually, but we also have PO generation as a workflow plugin, and so if you want to automate generation of your purchase orders, your stop to pop links, you can do that automatically through workflow. But here's my PO, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that number down. And so there's my sales document backordered line. It now has a stop to pop link, and it's sitting in my workflow. So if I were to go into my automation here, and I'm going to run this on demand. I'm going to do run now just so that I can kind of show you on demand. And I go back into my sales order queue. You can see that that document is still in back order. So even though I ran my automation to attempt to forward from that back order queue, it did not forward because that line is still showing as back ordered. And so I wanted to show that because I do have the checkbox to use workflow plugins and rules. So if that's checked, if that's set to true, it's going to say, hey, no, that's still back ordered. You can't forward that. So that's why even though I ran that automation, it's still in that queue. So now let's go ahead and go into our receiving module, and I'm going to take that same PO number. And this is, for those of you that don't know, this is our receiving module. I'm just going to plug in that quantity to receive, and this will generate a receipt for me. So I've got receipt 1862, and when you receive in SalesPad, you still have to post that in GP. So I'm actually going to go into my posting batches here. This is my GP window, and I've got a little batch set up, and I'm just going to cancel through these report prompts there. So that's going to actually post it, and so 1862 is just posted. And so if I go into my document here, we'll see that the allocation should have occurred. So there it is. It's no longer backordered. Allocation has occurred because the stop to pop link was satisfied. So now, if I go into my backorder here and I run this, we should see that document actually progress now because that allocation has occurred. So if I go back into Sales Monitor and refresh, you can see the backorder queue is now 0 because it now accepted that the criteria is met for it to advance. And so if we go into my pick queue here, that's the next stage in my workflow. You can see there's order 10460 automatically advanced to the pick queue because that stop to pop link satisfied that backorder. Now, as I'm doing this, I want to stress, I'm running it on demand by using the Run Now feature, the manual Run Now feature. And I'm doing that just so that you can see immediately the results of that automation running. But keep in mind that this would most likely, in a live environment, be set up on a schedule, running every 30 seconds, running every minute. You can define a pretty detailed schedule. I'll just kind of open up one of the schedules here. So you can define every day, a relative day of the month, daily frequency, start time, end time, date limitations. So you started on this date, ended on that date. So you can define a pretty dialed in schedule that can be, like I said, as often as every 30 seconds if you want. And so while I ran that now to show you that it accepted the rule and forwarded it, you would most likely in a live environment just see that deployed with a schedule. And as those stop to pop links are received in, satisfied, those documents are just going to automatically forward from the backorder queue to the next stage, which in my case is picking. And so what that allows users to do, kind of getting back to automating your day inside of GP, if you have stop to pop links and they're coming in, they're being received in, rather than manually going through your backorder queue and saying, oh, yep, this one came in, it's allocated, let's go ahead and forward that and push that into the pick queue. That's just going to happen automatically by virtue of those receipts being received into GP and posted. So that's a tremendous time saver for a lot of people to just evaluate that backorder queue and push them into pick as soon as that's done. So that's one example of automation running. I'll do another example here. So we'll take that same document. So 10460, it's in my pick queue, and I'm gonna manually pick this with our fulfillment tool. I'll manually fulfill it. Depending on what kind of fulfillment tool you're using, if it's data collection or something else, some other WMS tool, you would just use that at this stage here. But now that I've got it fulfilled, I'll go ahead and save that, and I'm going to mark it as complete. And that will push into my invoice queue. And so I have another automation that's set to look at my J-invoice queue. And so my invoice queue, I've kind of set this up to say, hey, in my workflow, if a sales order has progressed to the invoice queue, that means it's ready to transfer from order to invoice. I don't need any additional oversight. Anything that makes it to that queue is safe to say, let's transfer it to invoice. And so again, I've got my order sitting in this invoice queue. If I go to my automations, I've got a transfer to invoice automation. If I look at my settings here, you can see that it's looking at that J-invoice queue, and it's going to transfer that to an invoice as soon as this runs. And so again, I'm going to run this on demand just so that we can see the immediate results of that automation running. And if I go back to my sales monitor, that was 10460. If I refresh this, you'll see my invoice queue is now empty because that automation transferred that from order to invoice, so that's gone. However, if I go into my invoice workflow, you can see I've got a new invoice in there, 10043. And if I open that up, we should see that was, related documents. So related documents is showing the historical record that was driven from. And so here you can see that invoice was generated from order number 10460. So that was that order that hit the invoice queue. The invoice evaluated that, hey, everything's ready to go, line items fulfilled, let's go ahead and transfer this. And so it transferred into that invoice number 10043. So that's another example of your workflow as a document progresses to a particular queue. You've deemed it that it's ready to be transferred to invoice. We can automate the transfer from order to invoice by looking at that queue and evaluating. So those are two examples, two use cases. We also have, so when you're setting up a new automation, you have a number of things that you can do right out of the box. So we can process reoccurring sales. So SalesPad has a feature called Reoccurring Sales, where if you have a service billing that happens on a monthly basis, you can create a reoccurring billing definition that would auto-generate new new invoices or orders for that customer, and you can set that reoccurring sales document to be auto-generated with Automation Agent. You can auto-trigger emails, update a batch that the document entered, batch forward, which is exactly the platform I use for my back order scenario. You can remove batch holds, forward sales doc IDs, deploy scripts, or transfer to invoice. So those are kind of the automation instances that you can define right out of the box that are kind of largely associated with workflow. So now that we've looked at those two use cases, I'm actually going to bring over another environment here. This is, I'm on a remote desktop session with this other machine here. And this is my Magento test machine. And so for those of you that are curious, the e-commerce platform that I'm referencing happens to be Magento, but that isn't required. So if you have, some other e-commerce platform that you're interested in integrating to, we're really agnostic when it comes to what platform you're using. We basically use this as a framework to map the integration to whatever you want, really. There's really no limitations on it. I just happen to be using Magento here. So before we go in and kind of show how this functions, if you recall, I mentioned that there's automation that can be set at the actual kind of automation level as well as the component level. And that's important to understand in these multi-component automations. So for example, with my Magento, I have an inventory export that can be run on its own schedule as its own separate component. I have an order cancel. So if I delete an order inside a SalesPad, how I push that information back up, that's all going to be handled through the order cancel. I also have an order import. So if I'm importing orders, I can run that on its own schedule, export, and then my action center. So the export's the last one, and then my action center, as we previously mentioned, that's going to show you all the issues, any issues that were identified on the import. So I'm going to go ahead and run my order import here, and just so you know, this is my Magento environment here, and so I have a number of orders in here that are ready to be imported. I basically set this to go into my Magento order queue. And so if I were to go into my sales batch processing screen just to kind of look at that batch currently, you can see that I searched that batch and there's nothing in there currently. No orders have been imported yet. So when I run my import here, and again, I'm going to run this on demand, but you would probably have this just on a schedule pulling orders down throughout the day. I'm going to run this, and it takes about 4 seconds per record. So I think I have maybe 30 orders, so it's about 1.5 minutes to pull that in. But as that's running, if there are any issues, it's going to identify that, push them into the Action Center. So while that runs, I'm going to jump over to settings because I want to kind of point out that when you do have a multi-component automation, you also have kind of a larger, more detailed settings build out. So when I was just forwarding a document from one batch to another, to the next, as I had my back order automation, I really had just a couple settings there, whether or not I wanted to use workflow plugins and what queue I wanted to evaluate for the forward. So there were just a couple things, but on a more complex integration, such as this integration in Magento, we have a number of settings that we have defined that we'll need to kind of map out and set. And you can see that in the settings section, each one of those components kind of has its own detailed settings. So for example, order export. What batch inside the workflow do we want the orders, or are we going to require the orders to progress to before we run the job to actually push those details back up to Magento? So for example, this queue you may want to identify as the queue where all the lines are fulfilled, orders completely paid for and processed, you have the shipping label printed and the tracking number written back to the document, and any order that's in the queue that's had all of those activities performed against it, that's the queue that you want to point Magento to pull back those records. So that's kind of an example. Same thing with order import here, and you can see my order import's complete, 31 imported, 30 successful, 1 failed, so I should see 1 in my action center. But just to kind of close the loop on settings here, we do have this order import section. So again, what doc ID do we want to point these Magento orders to? What are our default warehouse? What's the default queue we want to push those into? Magento has some specific things like increment ID, line item ID, order ID. So what user-defined field inside a SalesPad do we want to map those to? So that's just kind of a flavor of some of the settings that you would kind of set up and define when you're building out these integrations. So my order import ran. Looks like I had 30 records successful, one unresolved that I'll have to address in my action center here. But if I go back to sales batch processing and I search this queue again, you can see there's the orders that were pulled in from my Magento site. So they pulled in via that integration. So if I go back into my action center and refresh this, we should see there was one record here, import unsuccessful, error, the credit card name is invalid, so it gives you some details about the credit card. And then we also have kind of the full JSON object here that we can then go through, and we have options to copy all. So if you want to copy this, throw it in a notepad and search specific details, you can kind of backtrack and see what caused that issue, fix it on the Magento side, and then mark it as resolved when that's done. And so if I save that'll mark that as resolved and clear that, and I can try to re-import that single record. But the idea is that we're going to flag records that were not imported, but we're not going to hold up the rest of the integration just for that single record. So everything that can import successfully will, and the exceptions are going to be handled on a one-by-one basis through the resolution action center here. So that was the order import example, and you can see that I have Magento increment ID, user-defined field here. And so, for example, if I want to go back and reference, order numbers, I can actually see here's that 4000002. So I've got that. And if I go back into SalesPad, that same increment ID is visible there as well. So you've got kind of that back and forth that you can view. So if we were looking at that order, you can see that it's in a processing state here, that particular order. If I were to go into SalesPad, for example, and cancel that, I want to kind of show how we would handle that cancellation as well. And so let's say that the customer calls and they no longer want this, so we're going to open this up and we're going to actually delete this document. So here's the sales order. I've got my line items pulled in. I'm going to delete that. And when I delete that, it's just going to prompt me with the typical SalesPad prompt that asks if you do want to delete it. I'm going to say yes. And you can see that there's an additional prompt now that we have this automation running in the back end. It's also going to ask you if you want to delete that from the Magento environment. And so I'm going to say yes to that record. And so that's going to delete it out of SalesPad, and it's also going to queue that up such that when my order cancel routine runs, and I'll just run that now, that will push that cancellation back up to Magento. So we'll see a prompt here in just a second that there was one cancellation, one was run successfully. So again, it was that 4002. And if I were to go in and refresh this, we'll see that status of processing is now moved to canceled. So because I canceled it in SalesPad, I deleted it in SalesPad, I responded yes to the prompt if I wanted to also cancel that Magento environment, and then I ran that automation to push that back up to Magento, and you can see that that's now marked as cancel in the Magento environment. So again, in this scenario, I was doing the run now option just so that I can kind of show on demand in the demo environment here. But typically, your order cancels, your exports, your imports, those are all going to be running on schedules similar to what I showed on the previous automation, where you can have it defined on a particular day of the week, a particular time, a particular duration, particular frequency. You can define all of that, and that's typically how we would see that implemented in the field, where it's just running and automatically happening for you. So with that, those were the three use cases that I wanted to show. So again, automation agent, new tool that can be deployed. You can automate workflow functions, but you can also automate things like integrations to other applications, data manipulation, data migrations. It's really kind of a framework that can be deployed and adapted and mapped to do a number of things for you automatically. So with that, I think I'll pass it back to Laura if we had questions that we wanted to go through.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, certainly if anyone has any questions on the material that Matt covered, now's the time to write them in over there in the Q&A box on the right. And let's see, let me take a look and see what's come in. Sure, there's a question that came in that says, any integration with Zapier?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't see why that would be an issue. Yeah, Zapier is kind of an application that, from what I understand, can kind of map and push and pull data to several different applications, and they have different integrations that already exist in their marketplace. So yeah, that'd be interesting to look at.
Okay, let's see. Does Automation Agent work with POS system called VAST, made by a company called MAM?
Like as I described Automation Agent, it's really kind of a tool set. So depending on if they have an open API, if that application has an open API, we can leverage that. If it has a SQL backend and you just want to set up an automation to push and pull data directly out of SQL, we could do that. So it's really pretty flexible. It's kind of a tool set that can be adapted and deployed to integrate to really just about anything.
Okay, is the Magento integration utilizing import-export of files or direct using the Magento API?
Yeah, it's the Magento API in this case.
Okay, is there a customer portal for orders?
We do have it would be separate from Automation Agent, and I assume you're asking, does SalesPad have a web portal for orders? And the answer to that is yes, we do. It's a separate application. It's not what you're seeing here, but we do have a web platform that allows you to basically extend either a internal user interface for like sales reps that are in the field that need to access SalesPad and enter orders, or an external user interface where it's a customer logging in and they're just seeing their own customer card and then they're able to enter orders and make payments. But it's separate from what you saw here with Automation Agent. It's our web portal tool.
Okay, let's see. What happens if I make a change to an existing integration while it's running?
So if that happens, it would take roughly 5 minutes for the change to be reflected. So it's going to continue to run, but the update would be visible within 5 minutes.
And I think you may have already addressed this, but I'll just ask it anyway to reiterate. Are you able to integrate with any other e-commerce platforms besides Magento?
Yeah, and just to restate that, yeah, we're really platform agnostic. We're not suggesting Magento is the way to go or not. We integrate with anything. So if you have a particular e-commerce platform that you use and it works well, we could look at doing an integration directly to that.
Thanks, Matt. And put out one last call for questions. Anybody has anything else, go ahead and type it in now. Let's see, here's one. It says, for recurring invoices, are there settings to specify a term, 12 months, 36 months, etc.?
Yeah, so to answer your question, yes. It's on the sales document, we have a plugin, Reoccurring Sales. You open it up, you build out your definition, and so you can define the frequency that should occur. And then once you have that definition built, generating it, without Automation Agent, it requires you to manually click Generate Reoccurring Sales. If you have Automation Agent running, it's just going to run that schedule and automatically generate them for you.
Is the Automation Agent, sorry, is the Automation Agent the method of e-commerce integration, or does it work with another application?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand that. Could you repeat that?
Sure, I'll just read it again. Is Automation Agent the method of e-commerce integration, or does it work with another application?
Yeah, so Automation Agent is our framework and is the service that we would deploy if you do have an e-commerce integration. So that is the service. There's also a service component that runs in the background. This is kind of the front-end card that's giving you all of your settings, but there is a service that runs that can be set up as a Windows service in the back end that just runs. Either you can manually stop it, or you can just have it set to automatically run. And I don't know if that was the exact answer you were looking for. But yeah, the Automation Agent is our tool to do the e-commerce integrations.
Okay, someone's asking if the WebEx is going to be available on video, and I can answer that one. Yes, we do record this session, and we will be sending a link to the recording of the video out within 24 to 48 hours, depending on how long it takes us to process it. So we'll make that available. Let's see, someone else says, I think that maybe the person was asking how many plugins / modules to get all of this to work.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, so it's just the Automation Agent license, and then we scope out the integration on a per instance basis. So We typically would have our BAs, our business analysts involved to just kind of go through your requirements. If it's one application, we'll do one instance. If it's multiple applications, we'll do multiple instances of integrations. But yeah, it's just you need this license, the base package, and then we scope out each integration separately.
Great, thanks. Not seeing any other questions come in. Does anyone else have a question for Matt? Been great interaction here. All right, well, I think we can begin to wrap things up, Matt. Thank you so much for your time today. Thanks, everyone, for participating. As I did just say, we did record it. We'll be sharing that with you. Also, as you're exiting the event today, be on the lookout for a very brief survey. It's only a couple of questions. The feedback helps us here at MSDW and also helps our presenters. So if you don't mind giving us that feedback, we'd appreciate it. And with that, we will close out. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.